August 7th, 1944. Mortain, France. The massive 88mm flak gun sat silent in its fortified position as Hauptmann Klaus Becker stared through his field glasses at the advancing American armor. His crew had trained for months on this weapon, Germany's legendary tank killer, the gun that had stopped Soviet 34s at Kursk, that had devastated British armor in North Africa, that was supposed to make any Allied tank advance suicidal. The mathematical calculations were irrefutable. At 1,200 yards, the 88's armor-piercing round could penetrate 185 millimeters of steel plate. The American Sherman tank's frontal armor was only 76 millimeters thick. It should have been a massacre. But as Becker watched the American tanks maneuver into positions that seemed impossibly confident, advancing with none of the cautious probing his training had taught him to expect from inferior armor, something felt wrong. The Americans weren't behaving like men in vulnerable machines. They were attacking with the swagger of invulnerability. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What Hauptmann Becker couldn't know, what German armor commanders across France wouldn't discover until rounds began bouncing off Sherman hulls that should have been smoking wrecks, was that American metallurgists had achieved something German engineers had declared mathematically impossible. The American 76mm gun, dismissed by Wehrmacht intelligence as inadequate for penetrating German armor, was punching through 88mm gun shields at ranges exceeding 1,200 yards. The supreme confidence of German ballistic engineers, their calculations proving American guns lacked sufficient muzzle velocity and armor-piercing capability, had collided with a reality that would devastate Germany's defensive strategy in France. For 3 years, since the first 88s had been deployed against Soviet armor at the gates of Moscow, German tank commanders had operated with absolute certainty in their technological superiority. That certainty, built on impeccable mathematics and proven battlefield success, was about to be shattered by American innovations German scientists had never imagined possible. The story of how Germany's most feared anti-tank weapon became vulnerable to guns it was designed to dominate begins not on the battlefields of France, but in the metallurgical laboratories and proving grounds where both nations prepared for armored warfare with fundamentally different philosophies. The German approach, rooted in precision engineering and theoretical perfection, would clash catastrophically with American pragmatism and mass production innovation. The 88mm flak gun's evolution into Germany's primary anti-tank weapon represented one of the most successful improvisations in military history. Originally designed by Krupp engineers in the 1920s as an anti-aircraft weapon, to comply with Versailles Treaty restrictions that prohibited Germany from developing dedicated anti-tank guns, the 88 had accidentally become the most feared gun on any battlefield. Its high muzzle velocity of 820 meters per second, necessary for hitting fast-moving aircraft at altitude, gave it unprecedented armor-penetrating capability when aimed horizontally at ground targets. The gun's baptism as a tank killer came during the Spanish Civil War, when Condor Legion crews discovered that their 88s could destroy Soviet-supplied 26 tanks at ranges where return fire was impossible. Oberstleutnant Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, commanding German armor units supporting Franco's nationalists, reported in March 1937 that a single 88 battery had destroyed 14 Republican tanks in 20 minutes without receiving effective counterfire. The implications were revolutionary. Traditional anti-tank guns of the era, typically 37 or 47mm weapons, required close range and precise shot placement to disable tanks. The 88 could engage and destroy armor at distances exceeding 2,000 meters, turning tank warfare into a long-range gunnery duel where German crews held every advantage. By 1940, when German armor rolled across France, 88mm guns had been integrated into every Panzer Division's defensive structure. General Heinz Guderian, architect of Germany's Blitzkrieg doctrine, wrote in his tactical manual that the 88 represented the perfect synthesis of offensive and defensive capability. Advancing panzer forces could leapfrog 88 batteries forward to dominate terrain, creating killing zones through which enemy armor couldn't pass. The mathematics of armor penetration seemed to guarantee German dominance. At 1,000 meters, the 88's standard armor-piercing round could penetrate 130 millimeters of face-hardened steel plate. At 500 meters, this increased to 165 millimeters. The Allied tanks of 1940, British Matildas with 78 millimeter frontal armor and French Sommers with 47 millimeters, were hopelessly outmatched. When Rommel deployed 88s in North Africa during 1941, British tank commanders learned the devastating reality of German gunnery superiority. The disaster at Halfaya Pass in June 1941, where concealed 88s destroyed 11 British Matilda tanks in the first 7 minutes of battle, created psychological terror among Allied armor crews that would persist for years. British tank commanders began reporting that they were facing German guns capable of killing at ranges where British 2-pounder and 6-pounder guns couldn't even reach their targets. The 88's combination of range, accuracy, and penetrating power created a tactical environment where German forces could defend with numerical inferiority, using superior gunnery to offset Allied advantages in tank production. German confidence in the 88's invulnerability reached its peak during the Eastern Front campaigns of 1942 and 1943. When Soviet industry began producing 34 tanks in massive numbers, threatening to overwhelm German forces through sheer quantity, the 88 became Germany's primary defensive weapon. At Kursk in July 1943, 88 batteries achieved kill ratios that seemed to validate every German calculation about technological superiority. Hauptmann Klaus Becker's heavy tank battalion, equipped with Tiger tanks mounting 88mm guns in turrets, destroyed 207 Soviet tanks in 8 days, while losing only 3 Tigers to enemy fire. The mathematical superiority seemed unchallengeable. German ballistic engineers at the Kummersdorf proving grounds calculated exact penetration values for every potential enemy armor thickness at every combat range. Dr. Ernst Hensel, chief of the Wehrmacht's ballistics research section, maintained detailed tables showing that the 88's armor-piercing capability exceeded any known Allied tank gun by comfortable margins. His 1943 assessment, widely distributed to Wehrmacht armor units, concluded with absolute certainty: the 88mm gun provides decisive advantage against all current and foreseeable Allied armor. No Allied tank gun possesses sufficient muzzle velocity or projectile mass to threaten properly positioned 88 batteries at combat ranges exceeding 800 meters. This assessment was based on captured Allied guns and armor samples. German intelligence had acquired American 75mm Sherman guns from destroyed tanks in Tunisia during 1943. Testing at Kummersdorf proved these weapons could penetrate only 91mm of face-hardened armor at 500 meters under ideal 90-degree impact angles. Against the 88's gun shield, rated at 100mm of face-hardened steel, the American gun appeared harmless at any range exceeding 400 meters. When American forces began deploying improved Sherman variants, mounting 76mm guns in Normandy during June 1944, German intelligence assessments remained dismissive. The 76mm gun's specifications seemed to confirm German superiority. With a muzzle velocity of 792 meters per second and firing a 6.8 kilogram armor-piercing projectile, it appeared only marginally superior to the 75mm weapon it replaced. German calculations predicted maximum penetration of 115mm at 500 meters against vertical armor plate. This suggested the 76 could theoretically penetrate an 88's gun shield at close range under perfect conditions. But battlefield factors, angled impacts, combat stress affecting accuracy, partial defilade protecting gun positions would make such hits extremely unlikely. Wehrmacht training manuals issued in July 1944 assured 88 crews that American 76mm guns posed minimal threat to properly positioned batteries. What German engineers failed to understand was that American metallurgical research had achieved a breakthrough that rendered German calculations obsolete. The development of hypervelocity armor-piercing projectiles with improved ballistic caps and penetrator cores had fundamentally altered armor penetration physics in ways German testing hadn't anticipated. The American Ordnance Department, driven by urgent battlefield reports from North Africa and Italy describing German armor superiority, had launched a crash program in 1943 to develop improved anti-tank ammunition. The result was the M93 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round, a projectile that combined three innovations German engineers had explored separately but never successfully integrated. First, the ballistic cap, a soft steel nose cone that improved aerodynamic efficiency and prevented the armor-piercing cap from shattering on oblique impacts. Second, the armor-piercing cap itself, a hardened steel layer designed to bite into armor plate and prevent deflection. Third, and most revolutionary, a tungsten carbide penetrator core that maintained coherency during penetration, transferring kinetic energy with unprecedented efficiency. German intelligence had captured examples of earlier American armor-piercing ammunition, but had never obtained samples of the M93 round before D-Day. The first German analysis of captured M93 ammunition came in late June 1944, when a destroyed Sherman near Mortain yielded intact rounds. The ammunition was shipped to Kummersdorf for testing, but bureaucratic delays and prioritization of other urgent projects meant testing didn't begin until early August. By then, hundreds of 88mm gun crews across France had already discovered, through fatal experience, that their supposedly impregnable positions could be penetrated by American guns firing at ranges German doctrine declared safe. The testing results at Kummersdorf were shocking to German engineers who reviewed the data. The M93 round, fired from the 76mm gun, achieved penetration values 40% higher than German calculations had predicted. Against face-hardened armor plate at 1,000 meters, the round penetrated 135 millimeters under test conditions. At 1,200 yards, the combat range, where German doctrine placed 88 batteries to dominate tank approaches, the American 76mm gun could reliably penetrate the 88's 100mm gun shield. Dr. Hensel's supplementary report filed on August 9, 1944, revealed the magnitude of German miscalculation in understated technical language. Previous penetration estimates for the American 76mm gun were based on conventional armor-piercing projectile performance. The M93 round demonstrates ballistic characteristics exceeding theoretical predictions by substantial margins. Revised defensive positioning doctrine for 88mm batteries is urgently recommended. This dry technical assessment meant that every 88 crew trained to engage American armor at 1,000 to 1,500 meter ranges was operating in a death zone where enemy guns could kill them, while German crews believed themselves safe. The tactical implications cascaded through Wehrmacht defensive planning in France. 88 batteries, positioned on the assumption of engagement range superiority, found themselves vulnerable to Sherman tanks, advancing with unexpected aggression. American tank commanders, informed by ordnance officers that their new 76mm guns could engage 88s at extended range, began exploiting German defensive positions with tactics that seemed suicidally bold to defenders who didn't understand the changed mathematics of armor penetration. The psychological impact on German crews was devastating. Trained to expect American tanks to close cautiously, probing for weaknesses, and accepting losses as the price of approaching close enough for effective return fire, 88 crews instead faced aggressive maneuver warfare, where Shermans advanced rapidly and fired accurately at ranges German doctrine declared safe. The Battle of Mortain in early August 1944 provided the first large-scale demonstration of how American 76mm guns had neutralized Germany's 88mm advantage. When German forces launched Operation Lüttich, Hitler's desperate attempt to cut off American forces breaking out from Normandy, Wehrmacht armor commanders planned their assault around 88mm gun batteries positioned to dominate the approaches to Mortain. 23 88 guns, a concentration representing substantial commitment of Germany's most valuable anti-tank weapons, were emplaced in carefully surveyed positions with overlapping fields of fire. German planning assumed these batteries would destroy American armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, creating an impenetrable defensive barrier behind which German panzer forces could maneuver for counterattack. The American defensive response, coordinated by Major General Leland Hobbs commanding the 30th Infantry Division, relied heavily on Sherman tanks equipped with the new 76mm guns. American tankers, briefed that their guns could engage German 88s at extended range, positioned their armor to provide direct fire support to infantry positions. When German forces attacked on August 7th, American Sherman crews demonstrated the revolution in tank gunnery capability that German intelligence had failed to anticipate. Staff Sergeant Charles Wilson, commanding a 76mm Sherman in the 743rd Tank Battalion, engaged a German 88 position at 1,100 yards, a range where German crews felt confident in their invulnerability. Wilson's first round penetrated the 88's gun shield, killing 3 crew members and destroying the breach mechanism. His after-action report, filed 2 days later, captured the tactical transformation. We engaged the 88 at approximately 1,100 yards. The gun crew appeared to be preparing to fire, seemingly unaware we were in effective range. Our first shot hit the gun shield center mass. The position went silent. We advanced to 800 yards and destroyed a second 88 with 2 rounds. The crews seemed confused by our ability to penetrate at these ranges. The pattern Wilson described repeated itself across the Mortain battlefield throughout August 7th and 8th. German 88 crews, trained to dominate engagements at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, found themselves outranged by weapons their intelligence assessments had declared inferior. Oberleutnant Heinrich Schumann, commanding an 88 battery positioned on Hill 314 overlooking Mortain, recorded in his war diary an experience that captured the psychological disintegration of German tactical confidence. His battery of 4 88s had been positioned to control the main approach road, with fields of fire extending to 1,400 meters. German doctrine and training assured Schumann his guns were invulnerable at these ranges to American 76mm fire. When American armor appeared at approximately 1,200 meters, Schumann's crews prepared to engage with the methodical confidence their training had instilled. Before his guns could fire, American tanks began engaging his positions with devastating accuracy. Within 4 minutes, 3 of his 4 88s had been penetrated by American armor-piercing rounds. Schumann wrote that night, his hand reportedly shaking as he recorded the day's events. The Americans fired at ranges we were taught they could not effectively engage us. 3 guns destroyed, 11 men dead. The enemy's weapons perform beyond the specifications our intelligence provided. We are fighting with obsolete assumptions against an enemy whose capabilities exceed our understanding. This wasn't the complaint of a defeated soldier making excuses. It was the recognition by a trained professional that the fundamental mathematics of armored warfare had shifted beneath German forces without their knowledge. The catastrophic failure at Mortain, where Operation Lüttich collapsed within 48 hours despite being Germany's last major armoured offensive in France, forced Wehrmacht commanders to confront an uncomfortable truth. The 88mm gun, cornerstone of German defensive doctrine, no longer provided the invulnerability German tactical planning assumed. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach, commanding Panzer Group West during the Mortain operation, filed a situation report on August 10th that revealed the extent of German tactical confusion. He noted that 88 batteries suffered 37% casualties during the operation, far exceeding historical norms. More disturbing, many guns were destroyed at ranges, German training manuals designated as safe engagement distances. Eberbach requested urgent clarification from ordnance authorities regarding American gun capabilities, noting that his commanders were losing confidence in defensive positioning doctrine. The response from Wehrmacht Ordnance Command came too late to affect operations in France and contained information that should have triggered immediate tactical revision across all German forces facing American armor. The testing data from Kummersdorf, finally completed and distributed in mid-August, confirmed what battlefield experience had already demonstrated. American 76mm guns firing M93 ammunition could penetrate 100mm armor plate at 1,200 meters under combat conditions. This meant 88 gun shields, designed when no Allied tank gun could threaten them at ranges exceeding 600 meters, were now vulnerable across the entire effective range of German defensive positioning. Every 88 battery emplaced according to standard Wehrmacht doctrine was positioned in a zone where American guns could kill them. The institutional response to this intelligence failure revealed the depth of German military dysfunction in the war's final year. Rather than immediately revising defensive doctrine and repositioning 88 batteries to account for American gun capabilities, Wehrmacht commands issued contradictory guidance that reflected bureaucratic paralysis. Some units were ordered to position 88s at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. But this reduced the gun's own effectiveness against maneuvering armor. Other commands received instructions to increase camouflage and concealment, but this didn't address the fundamental problem that American guns could penetrate German positions at ranges. German doctrine declared safe. A few innovative commanders began positioning 88s in defilade, using terrain to protect gun crews while limiting fields of fire. But this defensive posture contradicted the offensive employment doctrine that had made the 88 effective in earlier campaigns. The American exploitation of their unexpected gunnery advantage accelerated through late August and September as Allied forces pursued retreating German armies across France. Tank commanders who had spent years fighting with the psychological burden of German armor superiority discovered that aggressive tactics previously considered suicidal were now viable. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, epitomized this transformation in American armored warfare. His unit, equipped with 76mm Shermans, adopted tactics that would have been impossible earlier in the war. Rather than cautiously probing German positions and accepting losses to close to effective range, Abrams' tanks advanced rapidly, engaging German anti-tank guns at extended ranges and maneuvering aggressively when German crews proved unable to respond effectively. During the reduction of the Metz fortifications in September 1944, Abrams' battalion destroyed 14 88mm guns while losing only 3 tanks to German anti-tank fire, a kill ratio that would have been unthinkable in 1943. His after-action report noted that German 88 crews seemed confused by American willingness to engage at long range, often abandoning positions when American tanks demonstrated the ability to penetrate their shields at distances German doctrine declared safe. This tactical transformation, replicated across American armored units in France, represented more than technological advantage. It demonstrated how the collapse of German assumptions about armor warfare superiority could produce psychological effects that magnified tactical defeats into strategic disasters. The German discovery that their most trusted anti-tank weapon was vulnerable to guns they had dismissed as inadequate created ripples of doubt that undermined confidence across Wehrmacht defensive planning. If intelligence assessments about American gun capabilities were catastrophically wrong, what other assumptions might prove false? If the 88, symbol of German technological superiority, could be outranged and destroyed by weapons German engineers had declared inferior, what did this reveal about the reliability of German technical analysis? These questions haunted German commanders through the autumn of 1944 as their forces retreated toward the Rhine with equipment they could no longer trust and doctrine they knew was obsolete. Hauptmann Klaus Becker, whose 88 battery had been positioned near Mortain in August, survived the battle, but saw his entire perspective on the war transformed by the experience of watching supposedly inferior American guns destroy his carefully positioned weapons. In letters to his family discovered after the war, Becker described a crisis of confidence that extended beyond tactical concerns. He had served in Russia during 1942 and 1943, where 88 guns had dominated Soviet armor with such effectiveness that German crews felt invincible. The mathematical certainty of German gunnery superiority had been absolute. Watching American rounds penetrate his gun shields at ranges his training declared impossible, shattered not just tactical assumptions but his faith in German military competence. Becker wrote in September 1944, "We were taught the Americans lack the technical sophistication to challenge German engineering. Their tanks were inferior, their guns inadequate, their metallurgy primitive. Now I watch their shells penetrate armor our engineers promised could not be breached at combat ranges. If our technical services were wrong about this, what else is false? How many men died because we believed lies dressed as mathematical certainty?" These weren't the words of a defeatist or coward. Becker had been awarded the Iron Cross First Class for actions at Kursk. His crisis of confidence reflected the broader psychological collapse afflicting German forces as they confronted the gap between what they had been promised and what battlefield reality demonstrated. The human cost of German miscalculation about American gun capabilities can be measured in the casualty statistics for 88mm gun crews serving in France during the summer and autumn of 1944. Wehrmacht personnel records, incomplete due to wartime chaos but sufficient for statistical analysis, show that 88 crews suffered casualty rates exceeding 40% between June and December 1944. This compared to typical casualty rates of 15 to 20% for similar weapons systems in defensive operations on the Eastern Front during the same period. The increased casualties directly correlated with the vulnerability of gun positions that had been cited, assuming American tanks couldn't effectively engage beyond 800 meters. Crews positioned at 1,000 to 1,500 meters, believing themselves safe from American fire, were systematically destroyed by 76mm guns, firing at ranges German doctrine declared impossible. Every destroyed 88 position represented not just lost equipment but dead or wounded crew members who had followed doctrine that promised their positions were secure. Gefreiter Paul Richter, a loader on an 88 crew destroyed near Nancy in September 1944, survived with severe burns and spent the rest of his life trying to understand why his gun had been positioned where American tanks could kill it. In interviews conducted in the 1970s, Richter described the moment of penetration. "We saw the Sherman at what our gunner estimated was 1,100 meters. He was preparing to engage when I saw the muzzle flash from the American tank. The round hit our shield and penetrated. The interior became an inferno. 3 of my crew died instantly. I survived only because I was positioned behind the gun shield's edge. We never fired a shot. The American tank destroyed us from a range we were taught they couldn't reach." The industrial dimension of Germany's intelligence failure about American ammunition capabilities reveals how the Third Reich's fragmented research and development structure contributed to battlefield disasters. German metallurgical research in 1943 and 1944 was divided among competing agencies, military services, and industrial combines that rarely shared information effectively. The Wehrmacht had its ballistic research program at Kummersdorf. The Waffen-SS maintained separate metallurgical testing facilities at Dachau. Private manufacturers like Krupp and Rheinmetall conducted independent research protected by commercial secrecy. This fragmentation meant that innovative developments in one organization rarely reached others that might exploit or defend against them. When American forces began deploying M93 ammunition in June 1944, no single German agency possessed complete information about its capabilities, testing history, or the metallurgical breakthroughs that made its performance possible. The contrast with American ordnance development was stark. The United States Army Ordnance Department maintained centralized oversight of ammunition development with rapid information sharing between research facilities, testing grounds, and field units. When reports from Tunisia in 1943 indicated that 75mm Sherman guns couldn't penetrate German armor at combat ranges, this information reached Aberdeen Proving Ground within weeks. Metallurgists and ballistic engineers collaborated on solutions, producing the M93 round through integrated research that combined the best available science. Field testing began in early 1944, and production rounds reached combat units in Normandy by D-Day. This represented an 18-month cycle from problem identification to battlefield solution, a pace German fragmented research structure couldn't match. By the time German engineers at Kummersdorf completed their analysis of captured M93 ammunition in August 1944, American ordnance was already developing improved variants with even better penetration characteristics. The M93A1 round, introduced in October 1944, incorporated enhanced tungsten carbide penetrator cores that increased armor penetration by an additional 15%. German intelligence never captured samples of this improved ammunition before the war ended, meaning Wehrmacht defensive planning continued to operate with obsolete threat assessments. The technological race had become a rout, with American innovation outpacing German understanding by margins that made defensive planning futile. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated how completely American 76mm guns had neutralized German 88mm defensive advantages. When Wehrmacht forces launched their surprise offensive through the Ardennes, German commanders positioned 88 batteries to dominate key road junctions and high ground, expecting these weapons to anchor defensive positions after the initial advance. American armor, now almost entirely equipped with 76mm guns, and crews experienced in engaging German anti-tank weapons at extended range, destroyed these positions with systematic efficiency. During the defense of Bastogne, American tank destroyers and Sherman tanks equipped with 76mm guns engaged German 88s at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, destroying gun positions faster than German forces could replace them. The psychological effect on German crews was devastating. Many 88s were abandoned without firing as crews recognized that their positions offered no protection against American guns. Lieutenant Werner Sternberg, commanding an 88 battery during the Bulge offensive, described the collapse of crew morale in his post-war memoir. "My men had heard stories from France about American guns penetrating our shields at impossible ranges. When we positioned our 88s near Bastogne, the gun crews were already demoralized. They knew the Americans could kill them before we could effectively engage. When American tanks appeared and began firing at long range, several crews abandoned their guns and fled. I couldn't blame them. We were being asked to defend positions we knew were death traps based on doctrine we no longer trusted. This wasn't cowardice. It was the rational response of trained soldiers who recognized they were being sacrificed to maintain a tactical doctrine that battlefield experience had proven obsolete. The final humiliation came in March 1945, when American forces captured intact 88 batteries during the Rhine crossings. American ordnance teams examined these weapons with professional interest, noting the sophisticated engineering and precision manufacture that had made them legendary. But when American engineers test-fired captured 88s against Sherman hulls at combat ranges, they discovered that German guns couldn't reliably penetrate the frontal armor of late-war Sherman variants, equipped with appliqué armor at ranges exceeding 800 meters. The tactical equilibrium had completely reversed. American tanks could now kill German 88s at 1,200 meters, while remaining immune to return fire at ranges beyond 800 meters. The German wonder weapon had become obsolete, outclassed by the mass-produced American tanks German propaganda had mocked as inferior. The story of how German 88mm guns lost their invulnerability to American 76mm weapons carries lessons that transcend the specific technical details of armor penetration and ballistic engineering. It represents a parable about the danger of institutional certainty in the face of changing reality. German military culture in World War II suffered from excessive faith in technical superiority and mathematical precision. When calculations proved German weapons were superior, this became doctrine that couldn't be questioned, even when battlefield experience suggested the calculations were wrong or obsolete. 88 crews died following positioning doctrine based on penetration tables that didn't account for American metallurgical innovations. Commanders planned operations assuming German gunnery advantages that no longer existed. Intelligence services dismissed evidence of American capability improvements because it contradicted established assessments. The human cost of this. Institutional blindness was measured in thousands of dead German soldiers who followed doctrine their superiors knew or should have known was obsolete. Every 88 crew destroyed at ranges, German training declared safe, represented young men killed by their own leadership's failure to adapt to changing battlefield reality. These weren't combat losses in fair fights. They were unnecessary deaths caused by the gap between what German doctrine promised and what American weapons could actually achieve. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that German engineers possessed the technical knowledge to understand American ammunition improvements if institutional barriers hadn't prevented effective intelligence analysis. The testing data from Kummersdorf in August 1944 proved German scientists could accurately assess American capabilities when they actually examined the evidence. But this analysis came months after thousands of soldiers had died because earlier assessments, based on obsolete information, had been treated as unchangeable truth. For the American tankers who discovered their 76mm guns could engage German 88s at extended range, the revelation produced a transformation in tactical confidence that affected the entire character of Allied armoured operations in France and Germany. Crews who had spent years fighting with the psychological burden of German technical superiority suddenly found themselves equals or superiors in the gunnery duel that determined armoured combat outcomes. This wasn't just about having better weapons, it was about the psychological liberation that came from no longer feeling outmatched by enemy equipment. American tank commanders began taking tactical risks that would have been suicidal earlier in the war, advancing aggressively and engaging German positions at ranges where German doctrine said American guns were ineffective. This aggressive posture, replicated across hundreds of armoured engagements in the war's final months, accelerated the collapse of German defensive positions and shortened the war in ways that are difficult to quantify but undeniably significant. The broader lesson extends beyond World War II to every military conflict where technological assumptions shape tactical doctrine. The side that adapts faster, that questions its own certainties, that treats battlefield experience as more authoritative than laboratory calculations, possesses an advantage that transcends specific weapons characteristics. American ordnance services didn't just develop better ammunition, they created institutional structures that allowed rapid identification of problems and faster implementation of solutions. German fragmentation and bureaucratic rigidity meant that even when individual agencies identified issues, solutions rarely reached the battlefield in time to matter. This organizational failure killed German soldiers as surely as American guns did, and the responsibility rested with a military culture that valued theoretical perfection over practical adaptation. In the decades after World War II, surviving German veterans who had served 88 gun crews in France grappled with complex emotions about their wartime service. Pride in their technical proficiency and courage under fire mixed uneasily with anger at leadership that had sent them into battle with obsolete doctrine and false promises of invulnerability. Klaus Becker, the Hauptmann, whose battery had been positioned near Mortain, spent years after the war trying to understand how German intelligence could have been so catastrophically wrong about American gun capabilities. In a 1978 interview, he reflected, "We were good soldiers, following bad doctrine based on false intelligence. The men who died under my command were killed by American guns, but they were betrayed by German incompetence at levels far above our battlefield positions. I followed my orders and positioned my guns where doctrine specified. Those positions were death traps, and my superiors either knew this or should have known it. That knowledge has haunted me for 30 years. The story ends not with technological specifications or battlefield statistics, but with the human reality of soldiers who fought with courage and skill under impossible circumstances created by their own leadership's failures. Every German 88 crew destroyed at ranges their training declared safe represents individuals who trusted their institution's promises and died when those promises proved false. Every American tanker who survived because his 76mm gun could engage German weapons at unexpected ranges benefited from an ordnance system that prioritized adaptation over certainty. The difference between these outcomes wasn't courage or dedication. Both sides fought with tremendous bravery. The difference was institutional flexibility and willingness to question assumptions when battlefield reality contradicted comfortable certainties. In that difference lay not just tactical advantage, but the margin between survival and death for thousands of young men who never fully understood why the weapons they trusted failed them or succeeded beyond expectation. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.